In this video we'll take a look at the graph editor, the various functions that it has for us, and how we work with it and use those functions during animation. First of all then, we've got a few areas to the graph editor, of course menus up here. You've got this main viewport area, which is where your graph actually is. You have the channel list down here, currently empty of course. And then you have a list box down here where you can pick things, channels, expressions and so on. Along here, various tools for working with the keys. Then down at the bottom, curve settings, an expressions tab and a modifiers tab. Expressions and modifiers we won't look at in these videos, as again that's getting into procedural work, automated little pieces of animation and stuff like that. There are details on them in the rigging tutorials that I have, which of course is where they are more relevant. So what do we have? Well, we can pick an item or number of items in layout here in the main viewport, and we can get their channels in the graph editor simply by going to the selection menu here and either getting layout selected or adding layout selected. You see there are keyboard shortcuts as well, Shift G and L. If we get layout selected, then we get all of the channels for the selected items in the main viewport. You'll notice if here I go to the light and come over to the graph editor and Shift G, then I just get the light channels here. However, if having the light channels there, I then pick the camera and over in the graph editor put L, then we've got both the camera and light channels. So you can get the selected items only, or you can build up a selection of items like that. What do you have then? Well, of course, you've got the different independent channels for position, rotation. In the case of other items, you would of course have scale as well, and also any other channels that might be present. Another way to get channels is down here in the channels list menu. You'll see that you've got all your scene items listed there, and as you drop them down, it shows you the available channels there. You can just select channels either singularly or block select or control select specific ones, and you can then just click and drag them up to the channel list here and just drop them where you want them. Once we've got channels in the list, we can filter them down if we want. For instance, we can select channels, and you can see channel selection here as a highlighted channel. So you can clear any unselected ones, clear everything, remove the selected channels, invert the selection, reset the bin selection or select all curves, which basically means select all channels. You can choose to filter the curves based on a naming pattern. For instance, if I do star.h here, then of course you can see that the channels are named camera.rotation.h. If I just do star.h, then what I will get is any channel that has .h in its name. The star, of course, being the wild card. We've also got quick filters, so as we can grab just the position channels, or if we prefer just the rotation or the scale channels. So you can quickly add channels to the bin here and filter them down to get just the ones that you want. Then, with any channel or number of channels selected, you will see over here their graph, their motion graph, and all of their associated keyframes. At the minute you can see that that's all flat because we don't have any keyframes, so let's just create some rubbishy keyframes here on our camera, shall we? And there we see that our keyframes are of course sketching out in the graph editor like this. Currently I have keys or changed positions there only on the Y and Z channels. I've got keys on the other channels here as we can see, but there's no actual movement. Let's have a look at the tools here and what we can do with those. To start using these tools we need to have keys selected, so let's just select some keys here, which we can do by right clicking and dragging out this marquee here, and then we can see a little tooltip that we've got. At the minute I have the move tool selected, and when I click and drag you see that that changes the keys values. The axes that you see here in the graph editor are the value of the keyframe down the left hand side and time of course along the bottom. So you notice that when I am moving them they move up and down only. I can't drag them left and right in time. This is changing only their value. If I hold down Control and click and drag, then I drag them in time only whilst maintaining their value. They won't drag up and down. If you hold Control and then right click and drag, you see that you get these points appear. What this does is to drag copy your keyframes. So these are the keys obviously here, and I can drag and copy them to a new position obviously in time. Just drag them across, and when we let go, bingo, the keys paste in to those new positions like this. You can delete keys easily just by selecting them, hitting the delete key. Keys also have options. Go to any selected keyframe, right click, and you'll see a little menu appears. You can quickly change the curve type there, set ease in and ease out like that, which gives you a simple spline curve, or you can lock the key. When you lock the key, you notice it grays out like this, and you are no longer able to move it or change it in any way like that. Simply right click it again and uncheck locked, and it will be free for operation once more. You can create keys here directly in the graph editor with this little tool, the add key tool. Simply just go around and click, click, click. Notice what this is doing, of course, it works for all currently selected channels. So because I've got both the Y and Z selected here, then when I create a keyframe at a specific value, at a specific time, it is created on both channels. What you can also do is hold down Control and click on a key, and that will delete that key as well. So rather than having to select and hit delete, you can perform very quick key deletions like this. Don't forget, if you make a mistake, Control Z will undo your last action, although of course you have an undo little shortcut button up here. This fellow here is the scale tool or the stretch tool. Again, it's much like the move tool, so left clicking and dragging will scale and stretch the values, whilst Control and left clicking will scale and stretch time like this. Very quick and easy way to be able to reshape your curves, either in terms of their position. So for instance here, if I wanted this to, be a bit more accentuated, I could do that. Or if I wanted to change it out in time somehow, then I could do this as well. Kind of like a modeling operation somewhat. The rotate tool or the roll tool allows you to roll keys over. You'll notice that if you just click and drag, you get this warning saying that you have no defined time range. That you must do, so you right click, drag out a range that's going to be affected, and then once you have done that, if you left click and drag, you'll see that you can roll the keys back and forth across the range. Looks weird. What's really happening here? It's kind of hard to make out. It doesn't look like rotation or anything like that. It's not, it's rolling. It's a bit like Pac-Man. Remember how he goes off one side of the screen, goes off screen right and then pops out on screen left? That's what's happening here. When a key goes off the right side edge, it pops back on the left side edge, and vice versa. Hence, the keys roll over the selected area that we have panned out. Also with keys selected, we can then of course come up to the old keys menu here. You see that we have the option to create key. That's pretty much the same as the little create key tool, except it just gives us a dialog here, similar to the normal create key dialog. Of course, again, I've got two channels selected here, but I don't have any kind of channel option. All I have is a frame number and a value, so if I do that, it creates the key on all currently selected channels. You can also, of course, lock multiple keys, invert your selection, snap them to frames if you have fractional keyframes, set values for all of the keys, obviously that would set them all to be a singular value, copy the time slice or selected keys and so on, move or scale them by a specified numeric amount rather than just dragging with the tool, rolling again, and simple key reduction is also allowed for here. Footprints are an interesting little feature of the graph editor. What they allow you to do is to make changes with the ability to undo them in a much grander scale rather than having to go through a whole set of undos. Let me show you how this works. The first thing that you need to do is to leave a footprint. At the minute, it doesn't look like anything happened. But now let's move these keys. You can see that we have this ghosted curve in the place where our keys were. This allows us to see where our old curve was before we were making edits, and of course we're seeing our current new curve now after making the edits. And we can just move stuff around and shift it in time and, do whatever we want, make as much play and tweaking and everything else as we want with these keys. If we decide we've made a horrible mistake or a long series of mistakes and we want to go back to what we had originally, all we simply do is backtrack footprint, and bingo, we are returned and the keys are matched once again to what the footprint left behind was. Do notice if I move the keys again that the footprint is still there. Just because I've backtracked to it doesn't mean it's gone away. What you do want to do after leaving a footprint and doing any edits, or indeed undoing those edits, is to clear the footprint, which you deal with by clicking on Pick Up Footprint. At that point it's erased and you can't go back to it anymore. Other stuff that we have here then, well, you've got auto fit, which just fits curves in view. It's just like hitting A in Modeler or Layout, fits things in view. So you can auto fit, you can fit selected, just those normal fitting to allow you to get a quick clear view of your keys. Display, whole bunch of display options. Center graph, reset it, change keyboard shortcuts. Filter static envelopes. That's a handy one when loading keys. For instance, if I take the light here and I press L to try and add those keys to the curve bin, you notice they're not coming in. Reason why? Because they are static. If, however, I put a little Y position change onto the light there, so it's only got a keyframe on its Y channel, and then I come and load to the bin, you'll notice that only the light's Y channel actually comes in, since all of the other curves are static. Have plenty of other options here, like fractional keyframes on, stuff that you want to show and hide. Track layout time is a handy one. You'll see, of course, that with that on, as you're tracking through layout here, I'm just using, of course, the normal playhead, that my graph editor is always centered on the playhead. With track layout time off, of course, then the graph is centered wherever it's centered, and we see the graph's own playhead, of course, moving back and forth there. Move no key cell. This winds up treating things a little bit like Modeler, so having nothing selected is the same as having everything selected. Now, with no keys selected, I end up moving all of them. Track item selections. This is a grand one. Often very helpful during animation when you're working on, multiple items. With that turned on, then the graph editor will track what you are selecting in layout, and the channels will be automatically loaded for that item. Lazy layout update. This is basically a bit of an old thing for when layout was perhaps once less responsive. Normally with it off, of course, you can see that if I grab a keyframe here in the graph editor and start moving it, then we can see the item moving there in layout itself. Also, if I grab the playhead in the graph editor and drag that about, we see the playhead in layout moving. If we turn on lazy layout update, then you'll notice that moving the key does nothing, at least not interactively, until I release, and then layout updates. Similarly, dragging the playhead here, nothing happens to the time in layout until I release, and then it updates. Fit values when selected, very nice and simple. Other stuff like show the modifiers that are in play, that will show you little extra graphs that are being pushed by expressions or different motion modifiers. Curve tangents. You can anti-alias the curves, you can show key info. You notice, of course, that when you hover over a keyframe, up pops info for the key. Larger keyframe points use a custom point color. You can collapse or show these different areas of the graph editor there to give you a different view. That collapse can also be toggled with the little, up and down arrows that appear here at the corners. That allows you to do the simple collapse as well. Finally, you've got the main options here, where again you've got the display tab, which is a whole bunch of the stuff that was in the display menu. In general, again, you've got a whole bunch of the options that were in the display menu there, as well as being able to set here the default incoming curve type. That means when you are creating keys in layout, it will default to using whatever you've set the curve here to be. Finally, you can also, with the channels here, do some little right-click options to get menus there. This lets you set things like the footprints again, remove things from bin, replace them with other channels. You can save the envelopes, that is the keyframe data, to a file. And you can also copy and paste stuff. So I can take, for instance, the Y position here, copy that, come over to the X there, go to paste, and you'll see that all of the keyframe values from the Y channel are now copied over to the X quickly and simply. Lastly then, down here, the one thing I haven't mentioned, these little pre and post behavior switches that we have. This is on a per channel basis. Of course, if you've got multiple channels selected, then it would apply to all those selected. But you see, by default, they're set to constant. So that means that whatever the first keyframe value is, everything before that is constant. Whatever the last keyframe value is for the post behavior, everything after that is constant. But you can set that, for instance, to, let's say, linear, and you see that then the key, or rather the motion, just carries on in a linear fashion between those last two keyframes, basically forever. You can hit reset, at which point they all just go back to 0 immediately after the last keyframe. You can repeat, in which case the entire motion here is repeated. And this, of course, means for all keyframes, you can't choose to just repeat a certain section of the keyframes. It repeats the entire curve. You can choose oscillate, which is basically repeat but mirrored. So you see we have the curve running here forwards, then we have it running backwards, then we have it over here running forwards again. You can choose offset repeat, which is the same as repeat, but it will offset the value. So in other words, this entire block of curve here, in this case just these 4 frames, are repeated, but they are shifted so that this frame here takes on the position of that last frame there. And consequently, because this is more or less, bounces down, up and then down again, we can see that over time it's bouncing further down and down and down, basically forever. And there we go. That is the graph editor. Those are the functions that are available in it. It's not a huge amount to get to grips with, but it is all very, very useful. Being able to see, read and adjust the details of our motion paths and our channel curves. Being able to shift time, being able to copy and paste keyframes, either within a channel, between channels, or between channels of different items. All very fast, all very useful, and you will of course see us using the graph editor at different points throughout these tutorials.